From a bench outside the castle in Owings Mills, Maryland, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano, Jonas Shaffer, and columnist Kyle Goon here on a sweltering June afternoon. Guys, we have figured out our situation here on the benches a little bit more than we had previously when we had Gianna Hahn on. It was a bit of a tight squeeze. If you're watching live on X or on YouTube, you're seeing what we're talking about. If not, you should be. We have gotten a separate bench just for Kyle, just for this week. And Kyle, you showed us that you do, in fact, do leg day by lifting the bench and bringing it over here. So thank you for doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, more than anything, I was determined to show you that columnists get their own seats. We don't sit with the masses. We are off to the side. I think of it as sort of my own ivory tower here.
Sure.
So I just need to create physical separation between you and Jonas, just to show a little bit of superiority.
I get that it is hot. I get that we've been in the sun all day, but I don't think we smell that bad. However,
don't ask.
Yeah, wouldn't ask. Guys, it was a warm day out there as we witnessed organized team activities, voluntary organized team activities. We're going to discuss what we saw, what we heard from the senior secondary coach, Chuck Pagano, heard from wide receiver Rashod Bateman, heard from defensive coordinator Zach Orr. Guys, let's start with the breaking news here, and that is that Aaron Rodgers is off to Pittsburgh, and that totally shakes up the division. The AFC North, I think, is going to be toppled. The Ravens will no longer be the favorite in the division.
This is tell me the lie. A future Hall of Famer is the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers now.
It's true. Jonas, what was your reaction to the one-year deal that Aaron Rodgers is going to Pittsburgh? The deal that we knew was happening the entire time.
We're finally getting Lamar versus Aaron Rodgers. They've never played one another, and assuming that, I guess you can never assume anything with Aaron Rodgers, but if he is indeed healthy, I don't think they play each other until what? Pretty
late in the season, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's like 2 games in maybe a 5-week span. Actually, pretty late in the season. But we'll finally get Lamar versus Aaron Rodgers. And remember, Aaron Rodgers back in the day, before he had really gone off the deep end, he was among Lamar's biggest boosters. When he was going on McAfee, and I think during that 2019 season, he said, I knew Lamar all along was capable of this greatness. And I don't know if that was aided by any ayahuasca trips that he was on, or just by his own ball knowledge. But it'll be a box office matchup, even if it's not actually going to be that thrilling as it would have been back in 2019 or 2021.
I actually want to say I do think this is going to be a breakthrough year for Pittsburgh. I think they finally found a way where they can set up Mike Tomlin to get fired at the end of the season. I think they're finally going to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah,
it's been really hard to do. Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. I don't think he's going to win one in 2025, 2026, but I think they'll finally find a way to fire him, because Aaron Rodgers sows chaos everywhere he goes at this point in his career. He's 40-something. He's, preparing for the season by being in a very dark room on mysterious substances. He looked really slow and not that great at football last year. I don't see how this makes the Steelers a better football team than they were last year.
At least they have a long-term succession plan. 6th rounder Will Howard is ready to take over there, or perhaps Mason Rudolph. They can believe in. Guys, let's get to our word of the day here. Jonas, I picked this word of the day, and it is softball. The definition: a sport similar to baseball, played on a small diamond with a ball that is larger than a baseball and that is pitched underhand. First known usage, 1867. Do you know why I picked this word, Jonas?
Because that's how Jonas's questions go.
Softball questions?
I don't know.
Because you were covering Isaiah Likely's softball slam, the charitable event. And Jonas, for somebody who hates the game of baseball,
I don't hate it. I just don't like it.
You actively dislike it.
I don't like covering it.
How did you feel covering softball, getting behind the keys and describing home runs instead of touchdowns?
It was great. If every other hit is a home run, then sign me up for it.
You were it's like pulling teeth when it comes to you talking about baseball
it's
or
like
softball.
Pulling teeth listening to you talk about baseball on a football podcast.
Great. All right. Well,
subscribe to our other sister podcast, the Banner Baseball Podcast, please. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you for cutting that ad for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
We did another episode earlier today, which I'm sure Jonas is listening to. All right, let's talk football, guys. Let's talk about the news that we got earlier today before OTAs. and that is that Rashod Bateman has signed a contract extension. This was something that was not really on my radar personally, because we were sitting here a year ago after Rashod Bateman had signed a 2-year contract extension that took him through the 2026 season. That was for almost $13 million. This is a 3-year deal, according to ESPN, for $36.75 million, $20 million of which is guaranteed. And that takes him through the age 30 season, I should say, the 2029 season for Rashod Bateman, coming off his best year in the NFL, and he gets rewarded for it. And the Ravens are really stabilizing this wide receiver room with Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman. They add the 1 year of DeAndre Hopkins. But Jonas, this is to me a sign that the Ravens feel very comfortable with Bateman being their wide receiver 2 for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and you know, they were able to kind of buy low last year because of all the weirdness with him not having an accrued year, by not showing up at training camp when he should have, which gave them a lot of leverage in the negotiations, and then it ended up paying a bargain rate for what was a very nice season last year. I mean, I think he was kind of a victim of just how many weapons the Ravens had last year. I think it'll probably be a victim statistically of how many weapons they have this year. But he was remarkably effective, remarkably productive last year. He had, I think, more yards than he had over the previous 2 seasons combined. He had more touchdowns than I think he had over his career combined. Was great in the red zone, was unexpectedly the downfield threat on this offense. I think we all thought it would be Zay Flowers. And, is he ever going to be a like dominant alpha number 1 wide receiver? I guess you could quibble with that. I think there are some Ravens fans who think that he should be the guy at the top of this pecking order ahead of Zay Flowers, perhaps because of some of the stuff that Zay has or hasn't done in the playoffs. But if you can get this guy who is, getting paid well below like a T. Higgins, and you have that locked in, you have that financial security, then it could be another really great team-friendly deal in the long run. I think, he's always going to be a guy who wins with his smarts and his route running and not necessarily his downfield speed. But if he was able to be as good as he was last year as a downfield receiver, and the Ravens haven't really, tapped into his skill set in ways that maybe other offenses might, not to say he's being misused here, then I think there are parts of his game that we haven't seen that he could really age gracefully into.
It's, I just kind of want to acknowledge for a second something a little more historical. When was the last time that the Ravens drafted a receiver in the first round who they gave 3 contracts to, which is kind of unreal. It feels like, and I don't know that Rashod has done everything that, fans hope he would do. I mean, this breakout year was kind of what a lot of us thought he should be doing all along to some extent, and more of the production that was expected when he was drafted. But at the same time, I mean, it's breaking a curse. It's breaking, something that goes way, way back, among franchise history, just the bad luck at this position, especially in high rounds, and it's just, we're just a few years removed from Hollywood Brown being traded away, and kind of going off into, I don't even know what he's doing right now, but it's just a really.
He re-signed with the Chiefs.
Did he re-sign with the Chiefs?
He's on a 1-year deal there.
But it's just a kind of remarkable chain of bad luck to disrupt.
Yeah, and you compared him, when you look at other wide receiver 2s around the league, Jonas, and you mentioned T. Higgins. I mean, he's not getting close to T. Higgins money because he's not as good as T. Higgins. He's not nearly as productive as T. Higgins. But you look at the season that he had in 2024, coming off, I would say, a pretty disappointing 2023 season. As good as that offense was,
very disappointing.
He was coming off a serious injury, and so you could probably chalk some of it up to that. But he was, fewer than 400 receiving yards at that point. His previous high in terms of touchdowns in a season coming into this year was 2. He put up 9 touchdowns this past season, had over 750 yards. When Zay Flowers was out in those 2 playoff games, he caught 6 balls for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. And frankly, could have caught another one in that Buffalo game had Lamar led him perhaps a little bit in the first half, where they end up coming up short and just getting a field goal. But I mean, he is about as solid as you can get when he's healthy at wide receiver 2. And he just showed that this past year. Is he one of the top tier wide receiver 2s in the game? Probably not. And is Zay Flowers going to be one of the top wide receiver 1s in the game? Probably not, just given his size. It's incredibly difficult for somebody that size to be an elite production guy at wide receiver. However, the Ravens are clearly emphasizing the baseline. You know, we have seen some pretty putrid wide receiver rooms in Lamar's tenure and over the last 2 decades. They clearly want to influence, or they clearly want to stabilize the foundation here. And keeping Rashod Bateman under contract until he's 30, I think does that.
Yeah, and it raises questions of, I guess, what happens now with Zay, because I think when you have this franchise quarterback in Lamar who's going to reset the market whenever he does sign, you have a generational player in Kyle Hamilton who we all think is going to re-sign for top dollar, and you have all of these, you know, big contracts that are looming. I think the natural inclination, I think what a lot of other teams have done is, you know, put the most wide receiver money in the wide receiver one, which I think is Zay Flowers and will continue to be Zay Flowers. So,
or do the Bengals and just pay them both heaps and gobs of money,
and just continue to ignore the defense and not give Trey Hendrickson the money that he so clearly deserves. But I think it's interesting now that, you know, obviously we are 2 to 3 years away from the Zay Flowers discussion, because he's not going to become a pending free agent until after the 2027 season, and they could exercise his 5th-year option and make it the 2028 season. I think it's one year back.
He would be a free agent after the 2026 season.
Right.
If they exercise his 5th-year option, it's after the 2027 season.
Right. And if he makes the Pro Bowl again, then, you know, his 5th-year option is going to skyrocket, just like it did with Tyler Linderbaum. And that's going to be a very high number, because the wide receiver market just continues to accelerate in a way that the cornerback market really has not. So it's interesting that the Ravens are already committing this sizable chunk of money to Rashod Bateman. And now I think all attention turns to what kind of number Zay Flowers might be asking for, what kind of number Zay Flowers might be getting, just because you don't want to break that band up. And I think usually when you see this kind of, you know, roster formulation, it's all right, we're going to get the franchise quarterback, we're going to get the franchise wide receiver, and then we're just going to restock that very critical wide receiver 2 position through the draft, or maybe through arbitrage and free agency. But clearly with this Bateman deal being what it is, it seems to me that they feel like there's space at some point down the line to keep those 3 guys together: Rashod, Zay, and Lamar.
I think it does buy this team a little bit of time when you talk about that. And Paul, you kind of bring up, you know, the history of number 1 wideouts that are Zay Flowers' size. You know, you might kind of look at Zay and be like, okay, what's the physical toll going to be over the next 2 seasons? So you can kind of take a little time to read that. I think Jonas is right also that the Bateman deal could, you know, look somewhat team friendly in time, depending on cap spikes and things like that. And then you kind of see Lamar's situation. I mean, and it does seem like Lamar's deal is going to have to either be restructured or extended sometime in the next, you know, I mean, maybe even this offseason still. But, you know, of that trio, if you can kind of lock the small piece in place, Lamar's probably next, and then you kind of wait and see a little bit with Zay. So I think it is a bit of a time buy before you have to make some really tough roster decisions. And, you know, maybe they've determined Zay's going on a trajectory where they can't just afford him, you know, whenever he becomes a free agent. So, you know, maybe at that time they'll be looking for their next draft pick. I mean, this is a team that isn't afraid to spend draft capital in that area. And so I don't know. I mean, I think of those pieces, now Zay is the most movable.
Yeah, and you look at where those 2 guys were drafted in Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman, both guys that were drafted, you know, in the back third of the first round. And so to be able to get 2 guys that, you know, we feel pretty confident are going to be wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 for a while here, I think is pretty good value, because we've seen other teams whiff. I mean, the Chargers whiffing on a pick right before Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston. Although, we'll know, you know, he's coming along. Jonas still believes he's coming along slowly, but it is pretty good value that you got 2 guys. And, you know, the ceiling is never going to be all that high. I mean, occasionally you get a Justin Jefferson late in the first round, but typically the ceiling is not going to be ridiculously high for wide receivers that are drafted kind of in the back end of the first round. And Rashod Bateman, we heard from him today, he has always said and done the right things. I mean, I think back to that 2023 season, and athletically, you know, he was probably still in recovery mode a little bit, getting his feet back under him athletically. But, you know, Jonas, one of the big storylines from that season was just how often he was getting open.
The separation rate, I was about to bring it up. Yeah.
But not getting the ball. Rate. but he never said the wrong thing. He never threw shade on anybody. And today when he was talking, he said he doesn't care what kind of role he'll take with Hopkins in the building. He just wants to be out there. And for somebody, he's overcome some serious injuries, and he has always stuck to the plan that got him here. And for a former first-round pick, I think he has been pretty much in the locker room and on the field. When he's missed time, he has struggled, but he's been what the Ravens hoped he would be.
And he might not even be in his athletic prime right now.
25 years old.
I think 26, right?
26. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you look at someone like Terry McLaurin, who is asking for a new contract in Washington, and he might already be past his athletic prime, even though, at the tail end of it, just because of how late he came into the league and this kind of late emergence he's had with Jaden Daniels. Like, I think he's already 30. So
actually, Rashod is 25 until November.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So
dang,
there's
not often I get to fact check, Jonas.
Plenty
so
of
I take
there.
advantage
You
of it.
were right. But when we talk about just what he can be in this offense, I think obviously he's not going to be a guy who catches 100 passes, because especially this year you have Nuke Hopkins, you have Zay Flowers, you have Derrick Henry commanding touches, you have Justice Hill, both like all three tight ends. It's just going to be very, very tough for him to become a guy that like you want on your fantasy team.
Yeah, I do think the challenge might be this year where people kind of expect, okay, well, he just got paid.
Right.
The trajectory looks just like this upward slope. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I actually think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be really impactful. I think just the kind of game he has is so different than what Zay does, than what Rashod does. I think all those guys are going to be demanding the ball. So I would be surprised if Rashod, got significantly over 700 yards again. But we'll see. I just don't think it's going to be of extremely linear climb for him. And people might be pointing at after the season like, oh, look, he took a step back. But I don't know if that's necessarily true holistically for this franchise in the next few years.
Yeah. But just to kind of follow up, like you look at how he's been used here in Baltimore, because they haven't had a lot of great X receivers. He has been foisted into that role. We've seen Mark Andrews be forced to be an outside receiver. Rashod last year, I think maybe got like 10% of his snaps last year in the slot. And it's kind of nerdy talk because, again, like a lot of these formations that the Ravens use are condensed. So you can be an outside receiver and still be kind of at a slot distance. But there are other teams around the league with these prototypical X receivers like a Jamar Chase who are using those guys as inside receivers. And when you are an inside receiver, you have the opportunity to have a little bit more space. You don't have to have the sideline as a defender. You have these two-way goes. And Rashod was remarkably productive as a slot receiver last year. He just didn't get a whole lot of routes there, didn't get a whole lot of targets there because of how limited his opportunities were. So now if you have this trickle-down effect where maybe you like DeAndre Hopkins there a little bit more than Rashod Bateman, then you get Rashod Bateman more chances to be productive in a new part of the field that he really wasn't used or asked to do a whole lot of work in. And again, that's going to cut into like Zay's opportunities there and Mark Andrews' opportunities there and Isaiah Likely's there. So it really is going to be a balancing act to see who gets that prime real estate in the middle of the field that we know Lamar loves to target. But I think it's going to be an interesting flourish just to see what are the trickle-down effects of either Rashod getting better as an X receiver or Nuke Hopkins being good enough to play outside that you can free other guys to be more versatile.
Final quick point on the nerd talk, but I do think, again, that deal becomes more valuable in 2026 when you might be talking about post Mark Andrews, post DeAndre Hopkins, and people don't really think about that world, but Eric DeCosta does.
Yeah. I would say Rashod Bateman's sort of like this podcast. He can be good inside and outside, but I think for this podcast, at least we could say we would prefer to be inside. Guys, let's talk about the attendance here at OTAs, because that was the big storyline coming out of the first day of media availability. It was, look at all these veteran players who don't have to be here, who are here. Lamar Jackson is here, and Derrick Henry is here, and Kyle Hamilton is here, and Roquan Smith. Roquan is still here. Derrick Henry is still here. We are losing our footing here on the podcast, but Jonas is just going to have to hold that there the entire time. However, the attendance has waned a little bit. Lamar Jackson is no longer here. See, this is why we prefer to be inside, Jonas. Lamar is no longer here. Haven't seen Kyle Hamilton. So I don't want anybody to overreact one way or the other for the same reason that, we didn't try not to make a big deal out of all the veterans being there on the first day of media availability. I also don't want to in any way bash the veterans for not being here today, because we are in June. The season does not start for several months. And so it really doesn't have much to do with the success of the team one way or the other. It's nice that a lot of the veterans showed up on the first day, but by the same token, it doesn't doom the Ravens because a lot of the veterans aren't here in the second week.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it comes down to Lamar, and a practice in OTA without Lamar is much more boring than a practice with Lamar. It's just that there was a lot of juice, there was a lot of excitement when he was indoors, when he was in the facility for that indoors practice last week, and there's a lot less now. So it's tough to really get your hopes up for a Devin Leary led practice. But you kind of make do. So it's obviously something that he has to consider. We never want to speak on another man's pockets, but as with last year, there was a $750,000 bonus that he forewent. We think because he missed X amount of voluntary practices, and it seems like we're headed that way right now. And again, it would have been great for him to be here and be working out with DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre Hopkins wasn't here. So it's just a weird thing to comment on, because Lamar missed however many OTAs he did last year, and he had one of the best seasons ever by an NFL quarterback.
Well, yeah, I mean, also like team first guy saving the Ravens, almost $1 million. That's pretty cool if you really think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't care. I mean, I think I wish attendance was a little bit less by this door over here. That's definitely something I wish. But it's just doesn't matter that much. I mean, Lamar had an MVP season in 2023. Should have had an MVP last year. He's proven that he can take care of himself. Whatever he does in Florida, when he comes here, he's ready. I've been more impressed by the guys who are here and I wouldn't think need to be. I mean, Derrick Henry has been here all week.
Yeah.
And he's not exactly a guy who is thought of as somebody who slacks off on his own time. I mean, if he was in Dallas working out, I think we'd all be pretty confident that he'd show up to training camp looking like the strongest man we've ever met. So I just think it's really interesting that a guy like Derrick Henry's here, Marlon Humphrey's here. There are some vets at their groups. You're sort of like, oh, wow. Like, and so I always take it more as a positive than, as Jonas used the word boring to describe it when Lamar's here. Yeah, that may be true, but whether or not the session is boring is not particularly of consequence to the Ravens' fortunes this fall. But I always take it as a positive when you see a guy like Derrick Henry, who would be in Houston pushing a boulder up the hill or something. Or Dallas, I take it back. But he's here in Baltimore sweating it out with everybody else.
Yeah, doing some Sisyphusian tasks wherever he is. I just wanted to say Sisyphusian. That should have been our word of the day. By the way, didn't hand out our Who's Got It Better Than award, which could either go to Kyle Goon or it could go to Rashod Bateman.
I think people have it better than me. I've seen at least 6 carts go by me during the recording of this podcast.
The more concerning thing is the giant wasp that has been circling our heads as well.
It's great.
All right, one more thing, a couple more things before we get out of here. We did hear from Chuck Pagano, who was brought back into the staff. It's been a while since he's been in this building regularly, and he said not much has changed. It feels like a lot of the same infrastructure is in place, other than the additions they're making to the castle here. There's really not a lot that has changed. And he spoke glowingly about this organization. He spoke glowingly about the fact that they go out and find people who love football. I thought the quote that you tweeted out at Jonas_Shaffer was pretty telling. He said, if you don't love ball, you can't survive here. So good to hear from Chuck Pagano for the first time since he returned to the Ravens. And, Zach Orr also talked about how Chuck Pagano was helping with some of the things that Orr and the defensive staff was already doing, which was simplifying communications. We saw how much that made an impact in the second half of the season, when perhaps the menu was too long in the first half and they were getting confused. They were on different pages. They simplify things. They shorten the communication. They're able to get calls in quicker and be on the same page. I think that clearly we're seeing that this is an area that they need to work on. And hopefully Chuck Pagano is as in his experience as a defensive coordinator, can help with that.
And we'll know pretty early on just how buttoned up they are, because they go at Buffalo week 1, first Detroit on Monday night, week 3, at Kansas City week 4, first Houston, first the Rams week 5, week 6. And
Are these teams good?
those teams are pretty good. And you'll have maybe some like a rookie starter in Malachi Starks. Maybe you'll have new guys in new spots. Jalen Armour-Davis apparently is now getting a look at safety, as some other guys might, as the Ravens try to figure out life without our Darius Washington, life without Brandon Stevens. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, I feel better just in theory about like a kind of old dog defensive coordinator coming in and trying to help a defense, trying to help a team, that I would an old dog offensive coordinator. I think someone pointed this out on Twitter during Mike McDonald's heyday here in Baltimore, that like the best defensive coordinators are either the ones who are just like breathtakingly good right out of the jump, like a Mike McDonald, or the guys who've been around the park so many times that they know every answer, every check, every possible permutation, because they've just been around the game for so long, like a Dean Pease was, for instance. Like that's why he was able to coach for as long as he did. And I think Chuck Pagano, having the perspective that he does, having stepped away from the game from a couple of years, but always being engaged with it, either through McAfee or just through his own kind of coaching circles, I think he brings a level of perspective that Zach Orr, frankly, can't have, just because of how young he is. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of impact he has, whether it's going to be more individualized, whether it's going to be more conceptual, more X's and O's. I think Zach Orr said today that he was impressed by how many guys have come up to Chuck saying, like, what do you want me to do? And he already has a laundry list of things for these guys to work on. And that shows that he's committed. That shows that he's already done the homework. And from here, it should be kind of smooth sailing. Yeah,
it's really nice to see that really zesty attitude he brings to the room. I feel like he's a guy who's passionate. I think, and he sort of was saying, when you're out of the league and you don't have those opportunities as much, then you kind of come to see the value in what it is. So I think, he said the opportunity with John Harbaugh kind of made him jump off the couch and was probably the only one that would have. He seems to have a lot of passion for this organization, a lot of passion for the players, and the guy who has had a little time to recharge. That's kind of why I sense today somebody who has been out of the game for a little bit, but is ready to re-engage it. He doesn't come across as cynical. He was talking about retired life, and he'd finish his list of chores by 10 a.m. He says, well, it's too early to drink. What do I do? And, I've never related more to anyone in this building, I think. But no, it's just nice hearing that enthusiasm.
Yeah, and somebody who is going to come in and not demand that anybody do anything his way. It seems like he is very much understanding that he's going to take a back seat. He's going to let Zach Orr develop as a defensive coordinator, and he's going to fill in where he's needed and where he can help. But that doesn't mean that he's going to say, we're doing things my way, and because of all the experience, look at my years of experience in the league. So I think that is an important thing for anybody who comes into this role as well.
Yeah, I don't think he was asked today what exactly his responsibilities are. Obviously, he's related to the defensive back group, and I think when he was first hired and he was like talking on McAfee, he said that he almost made it sound like he kind of has a freelance job where he's just going to bounce from project to project, doing things that he's interested in or that John Harbaugh asks of him. And certainly with his wealth of knowledge, he can pretty much contribute at any facet of the game. But it's going to be interesting to see, when it comes to the Ravens wire productions and just talking to guys on the field or in the locker room, what exactly he has his fingerprints all over. Because I imagine, they're probably paying him a pretty healthy salary considering just how strong his credentials are. And you don't want to bring him in just to bring him in because you're pals with him. Just like, John Harbaugh and Pagano go way, way back. And certainly you work better with people that and that you're close with. But, this team has Super Bowl aspirations. And I think Chuck it's going to be interesting to see what exactly they ask of him, because this coaching staff is already so big.
I don't go as far back with you guys as John Harbaugh does with Chuck Pagano, but I think we work well together.
Oh, I was just going to say we're on our third season of this podcast, so that's how we all love ball, because we've survived into our third season.
We have survived, although barely. We'll see if our wasp stings by the end of this podcast change things. Guys, the Ravens have another week of OTAs next week. Then they get into mandatory mini camp. Hopefully we have a chance to do this again. In the meantime, at Kyle Goon is his handle. At Jonas_Shaffer is Jonas's. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Like, rate, review, subscribe, write us a 5-star review, and I'll read it out here on the show. And of course, subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months.
Yeah, it'll help us buy a podcast space in this building.
Perhaps. Who knows, though?
Maybe.
Maybe. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are going to pack this up and escape this wasp. But in the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. For Jonas.